So you brought up a couple things, and there's a couple things I want to ask you about. And the first being spirituality and yoga. And, so your parents were spiritual. You grew up with that kind of in the house.
Absolutely.
Was it something you always embraced, or was it like something you came around to at a certain point?
Yeah, I think like drawing, I think it's always been there.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. When I think back about my childhood, there was I think this is true for a lot of people. I think some kind of dreamy, psychedelic kind of things happen when you're a kid sometimes where you're not sure if they're a memory or a dream or
Sure.
something. And,
Sure.
brushes with the supernatural. And I definitely felt like demonic powers in the house at times, or I would feel
Oh,
spiritual ecstasies at times,
yeah.
especially being my parents, or I'm sorry, my grandparents convinced my parents to put me in Christian schools, a very Germanic Lutheran kind of right-leaning school, which was very challenging. But I always loved Jesus, and I always felt some kind of like mystical connection with
Yeah.
not just some of the religious aspects, and not just with Christianity, but also my parents were very nature oriented, and so feeling those bonds with nature, feeling bonds with animals, um, the mystical reality of what love is, and yeah, it's a complicated subject, and it's often people who are deeply into spirituality often find it a lack of words for to truly convey it because these are things to be experienced more than explained.
For sure, for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, I'm always curious about that because I know, like for me, like I grew up I grew up in Grosse Pointe Woods and the suburbs over here, and growing up, same era, 80s, 90s, and my parents they met at Song of the Morning. That's how I got integrated into it, and
Great
so.
people, by the way.
Yes, yes, thank you. Shout out to my parents for sure. Roy and Marianne.
Roy,
I know
Marianne.
they're going to watch this. I
Yeah,
know they're going to
good.
watch
Love
this.
you.
But so for me, like growing up in a more conservative white suburb outside of Detroit, like yoga was not then what it is today. And I very much like I'd have friends like come over for like sleepovers as a kid, and my parents are doing like half shoulder stands, like and stuff like that. And my friends are like, what is going on? Like, your parents are weird. And like Street Fighter was out, and everybody would always yell yoga flame at me, like stuff like that. So I was like in like a friendly way amongst friends busting each other's balls and stuff like that. But so I always I didn't really get into my yoga practice until I was out in LA, and obviously SRF and Yogananda is, that's where the headquarters is and stuff like that. And it wasn't till, my mid to late 20s that I started read the autobiography, started practicing more, started reading some of Yogananda's works, and really started embracing it. But as a kid, I hated it. I was I didn't want to be the weird kid.
That's
I
my
didn't
parents'
want to,
stuff.
yeah, I didn't want to go to church and do
Yeah.
any, go to the stuff down at the DIA, or it was at the Scarabs Club for a while. And I was just I hate it. And they made me go every week. But, yeah, then as I got older, obviously it catches up with you. And,
Yogananda is an interesting character, and so is Yogacharya, who started Song of the Morning, and they're entities, actually. In my personal opinion, they're entities, as in they can be communed with, communicated with, and they can actually intercede for us in a similar way that Catholics see the Catholic saints. They can be interacted with. They're conscious elements in our universe. And I felt like when I look back across my life, Yogananda coaxed me in ways before I knew what he was doing, maybe. But I read the autobiography in the late 90s, and actually it was a reformed Nazi skinhead, which I did not know at the time, who actually had found his way in this world through Yogananda. It took many years before he told me that part of his life, but he's the one that put the autobiography in my hands, and he was such a strange character. felt it kind of compelled me to read the book, and I loved it at the time. I read a lot of spiritual books in my 20s. It was in a big stack of many great minds. But I really loved that book. And later on in my 20s, I also lived in LA and visited certain sites associated with the Self Realization Fellowship, like the Lake Shrine and the Hollywood Temple. But it wasn't, and I actually visited Song of the Morning once in 2002 because my friend, his name's Ed, he was a summer intern there then.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until 2018 I was living in northern Michigan and I was married and we had a death in the family, and then which was my wife's mother, who both of us obviously were very close with, and it was very devastating. And after a couple of weeks, it was too much for my wife, and she left and never came back. And 2 weeks after that, we had this huge storm come through and destroy a huge part of our neighborhood in northern Michigan, and it was. I mean, it really pushed me to a really
Wild.
dark place of suffering. And it was during that time that I knew about Song of the Morning. It was about an hour away. I started going there, and I really used Yogananda's teachings and yoga and meditation to put myself back on my feet. Because for people that have been in that situation, when you're really suffering and you're in a grief state, there's really two directions to go. It's like self-preservation or self-destruction, and sometimes it's a little bit of both. But I really chose self-preservation through really adhering to Yogananda's teachings, and I'm just eternally grateful for Song of the Morning and Yogananda for helping me,
Yeah.
because that's what it did.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know where I would be if I did not, become drawn to the teachings and start, reading, meditating, doing a regular yoga practice and all that. And 100%.
It's solid gold coping mechanisms.
Yeah. 100%. Like, and I mean, I'm still like, I don't know. I always joke. I'm like, man, if I'm bad now, like, could you imagine, like, if I didn't, like, because I'm
Could be
still
dead.
like, and it's
Could be
like,
dead.
man, like, be in trouble. Who knows? So something that's fascinated me about you, or that I found fascinating, that really kind of drew me to you as I got to know you better, is when I first met you and you were taking the training up at Song of the Morning. You had dreadlocks down to your knees, and you very much had that, like, kind of Rastafari, like a little bit of a hippie vibe and like stuff like that. And so what really caught me a little bit off guard and stuff once I got to know you better and saw your teaching style and talking and things like that, is how fascinated and educated you are and how well read you are, in terms of not just spirituality and religion, but history overall, and just like how like well spoken you were and able to kind of recall and recant these stories and things that you've read and learned. I mean, has that always been a so you substitute teach now?
I do substitute. That's another thing I do.
And you teach yoga. So teaching is not only are you, I think it's a very dynamic thing amongst artists to be creative. And I guess my point being that, oftentimes you find artists are creative and kind of in a way that their head is in the clouds.
Sure.
But I also find you to be very well rooted into I don't know, like fundamentals and facts and, like that sort of thing that really like, like I said, like kind of fascinated and was impressed me. And I was like, oh, this is like very like deep, dynamic person,
I got surprises.
So like, speaking to that, like, is that again, just like natural curiosity? Like,
Yeah, I was a curious kid, and I think it's one of the things that got me picked on a little bit. I don't know if I'm on the spectrum or not. I've never been tested for that, but I suspect maybe I am on somebody's spectrum.
Right.
But when I was a little kid, just to put things in context, I was obsessed with classical music, and when I was 10 years old, I could tell you the life stories of like 12 of the great composers, and I was obsessed with that movie Amadeus, and like even to this day, I can like sit there and quote the movie as it happens. Like I just was obsessed with that, and I also loved the Detroit Institute of Arts, and I had certain sections I'd love to sit in, the Italian Renaissance stuff, the Dutch masters, and the 19th century portrait artists like John Singer Sargent, and some of the Art Nouveau people too, like Alphonse Mucha. There was something so compelling and just beautiful. And when you're only 11 years old, it's hard to really know or intellectualize that. And I go to school and the kids are all talking about football and Bon Jovi, and I just like totally disinterested, which made me a target. But I think I've always had this like I want to know everything about something. So as soon as I get interested in, I just obsess over it,
Yeah.
and learn everything I can, and then I want to talk about it with everybody, whether they want to hear about it or not. And I think that helps to really like I'll read something and then I want to talk about it, and I think it's that process that really drives it into my memory banks. And people have often told me they don't understand how I can remember so many things, but I can't tell you. It's just
I literally can't remember what I did yesterday.
Well, I can't remember that either, but I can quote Ramakrishna.
Right.
I can tell you the entire history of Haile Selassie and everything. I mean, I think I have a deep love for history and people and humanity, and an appreciation of humanity's struggle. And I really love political struggle stories too. So like in the 20th century, I was really fascinated by the Cuban Revolution. I was really interested in like Ho Chi Minh and how, like here's a cool history tidbit. So you get a little view into Sonny's head. When the American forces were invading Vietnam to go to war there, Ho Chi Minh rallied his people by using a translation of a Thomas Jefferson speech, because he loved Thomas Jefferson. He loved the idea, those early founding fathers of America. He loved those ideas that we promoted, and he used them to rally his people to fight us as if we were the British. And I mean, boy, is that a plot twist in history that a lot of people don't understand, that we tend to just gloss over things about conflicts in this world and want to like demonize the other, especially if our country is fighting your country. But if you look a little closer, sometimes it's just things are just so complex. And I would recommend people check out Ho Chi Minh.
History is a little messed up, especially our history when you actually get into it. I mean, I think some of that blind patriotism and is being lost a little bit on our generation as resources and technology and things, and start to come to the light that it's like, oh,
absolutely.
Yeah, that perhaps our motives in doing these things were not as pure as the history books wrote and we were taught when we were in school.
And my father's side is 100% French Canadian from Quebec,
Yes.
and they on that side of the family we have some American Indian ancestry, and so there was always an appreciation of Native American history on that side, and that's also a subject you should look into. And then growing up in Detroit, around all the Black folks, and I always had Black friends, and Malcolm X had his first temple here in Detroit, and I loved Malcolm X when I was a young person. About 15 years old, I became obsessed with Malcolm X. And back in the early 90s, Malcolm X was kind of a fad because Spike Lee did the Malcolm X movie with Denzel Washington. And I would wear the X clothes and the X hats, and I didn't know any other white kids that would wear that. And, some of the old racist people in the family, they'd make their heads spin around. But I didn't care. And I just really identify for some. It's just interesting. As a white man, we tend to be the perpetrators in history, but I I've always appreciated struggle, class struggle, racial struggle, including the LGBT rights struggle too. I think any struggle for freedom is Sonny appreciates it.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. What do you think style wise? I mean, your art, you have a lot that I've seen. I'm sure there's a ton more that I haven't seen. And it's how would you describe your style? Like, do you like, because I mean, creature comforts wise, I have what I would consider more your like kind of like electric pop art, bright neon colors and, mixing up like pop art icons like Dolly and, the Dorothy Monroe one, obviously, which I love. And, things like that. And you also, I mean, even outside of that, some of your spiritual masters collection, I would call it, incorporates a lot of those electric colors and things like that too. But you also have, your Rastafari art. You have, your logo there on your hoodie. You have pieces you've been commissioned to do at places around the city. I mean, obviously, I can see you do a lot of, with people,
Yep.
characters.
Yep.
But, I guess the question is like, I mean, how would you define your style? Would you define it as one thing?
I definitely, my main influence is people, drawing people. Even when I was a little kid, that's always what I drew for the most part, was people or, superheroes or things like that. But I always wanted to draw people. And that was my focus when I went into school. And I actually took an anatomy class, anatomy for artists, which was a very difficult class actually, but aced it. For example, for the final exam on that, they gave us a white piece of paper and said, draw the pelvic bone from 3 directions from memory. It was nuts. But people is my main focus. And I think when I find somebody I appreciate, and I've drawn many of my friends, actually, I really love drawing my friends, but also historical figures, musicians that have been meaningful in my life. It's like I want to take them and then almost similar to like what the Catholic Church does. They'll take a saint and then they'll make like a illuminated painting of them and then kind of like try to like embellish their soul or bring their soul out into their eyes, or like almost like a tribute to that person in a way. So I think some of my art is definitely kind of a tribute to the people I love. And then after that, I kind of get into other things. Like really anything I can see, I can draw. And I also can embellish it a little bit. I've not always been good with like, paint how you feel about your feelings with colors. Love that stuff. But, that's not my tendency. I'd rather make an image of somebody and it'll be obvious to you that I appreciate that person. And I really focus a lot on the eyes because the eyes are the windows of the soul, Shakespeare said. And I really believe that. And a lot of times it's just about where you put that little glint of light in their eyes, that makes it look lifelike. Um, I really do have an appreciation for religion in general
Mhm.
and the good parts about it. I have really, when it gets into the political parts about religion, I have all these problems. I think most of us do. But I do like the feeling of spiritualizing something. That's to me what I think I'm doing with my art. Like I did a portrait of Prince right after he passed away, and that was deeply moving to me because my mother was very obsessed with Prince, and so I just wanted to do a tribute of him, and I wanted to my art of him to spiritualize his image, and I think that's a lot of what I'm doing. And also, like when I was really deep in the Rasta thing, I wanted to. It's such a fascinating history, what it really is, not just from what happened in Jamaica, but the tale of Ethiopia, which is thousands and thousands of years old, and making imagery that can tell that story. In the ancient world, people were illiterate, and if you went to the church or the mosque or things like that, there would be images that could tell stories, and you could just look at it and get a story out of it. And I think some of my art kind of tries to follow along those lines. When I was studying African art, there's a lot of African art that tells stories, and so I was deeply influenced by that. So my style is a mixture of things. In the contemporary art world, one of my favorite artists is Kehinde Wiley. He's got a couple pieces at the DIA. He's an African American artist, and his way of blending the old styles with new contemporary imagery and patterning. I like to put patterning in my art too, and especially when I do musical oriented things. Music is a pattern, so to put a visual version of a pattern into something to me is like music. Um, I loved the Art Nouveau artists, as I said, like Alphonse Mucha. His line work was just impeccable and kind of hypnotizing. So I think some of my art also has kind of a hypnotic pattern to it. I sometimes even put optical illusions into the backgrounds and things like that, like I did with the Dali image. Uh, so I don't know. It's a lot. I could probably go on and on this subject, so I'll stop.
Okay.